Like many therapies in GI, let's say probiotics, they can improve constipation in those who are constipated. They can also reduce diarrhea in those who have diarrhea. So they have more of a corrective effect. And if you're malabsorbing nutrition, then the elemental diet can help you gain weight. And that's been shown in some studies. Hey everyone, welcome back. Let's discuss a very interesting study, one more data point supporting how effective elemental diets can be, in this case, in reducing gut inflammation and gut autoimmunity, as seen in a model of Crohn's. And let me start with this summary of the findings. And what you're seeing here in this group of Crohn's patients, Crohn's being an inflammatory and autoimmune condition of the small intestine and or large intestine, they were followed for about a year, and half of them were consuming elemental diets. The other half were consuming regular diet. And for the elemental, and I'll come back to defining this in a moment, but they were consuming about half their daily calories from elemental dieting, the other half normal food, compared to the other group that was eating just a kind of control diet, if you will, an ad libitum diet. And what you're seeing here is a halving of the relapse rate over a year period, from 64% chance of relapsing with Crohn's if you were eating a normal diet, as compared to a 34% relapse rate if you're using the elemental diet. And this study appeared in Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics, a great journal. And the elemental diet is, if you haven't heard of this, a meal replacement that is unique for a few reasons. One, it is pre-digested. Now that may sound a little bit gross. We're not talking about sort of the mama bird, baby bird sort of pre-digestion, but pre-digested so that it's low fiber, essentially zero fiber, zero residue, and doesn't require your system to have to work to process the food stuff. And for those with IBS, as this study finds, IBD, whether it be UC or Crohn's, this pre-digestion helps to make the nutrition easier to absorb. If you're someone who has digestive symptoms, you may notice that really rough and raw food is harder on your gut. So take that concept a step further, or a few steps further, and having a meal replacement that is pre-digested makes it very easy on your gut, almost soothing. So pre-digested, and along with that, or partially because of that, the nutrition, the protein, carbs, and fats are absorbed very quickly in the GI tract. Therefore, you will not require down the line to have to work. So within the first few feet of the small intestine, you'll absorb the elemental diet, and the remainder of the intestinal tract won't have to work to process, which can give those tissues a break. But also, if there is an overgrowth or dysbiosis, you can help starve and, at least theoretically, rebalance that overgrowth. And I think the same thing likely applies to fungus. A question that we'll get at the office is, if I have fungus, which by the way is very unclear in terms of what are accurate markers to diagnose this. So we should be careful with making that a confident conclusion based upon a stool test or a blood test or an antibody test, because it's not super accurate. But someone is concerned about, albeit perhaps inaccurately so, Candida, and they'll ask, should I not use the elemental diet? Because the carbohydrates, oftentimes maltodextrin, are pre-digested, therefore the carbs aren't bound up in fiber and could feed fungus. And that's an understandable concern to have when we're thinking mechanistically. But consider this: if these sugars can't get to the pretty much 80-ish% of the GI tract, then if there is a fungal or candidal overgrowth, those should most likely be starved also. With one caveat, one exception, and that is if someone has symptoms of this oral, pharyngeal, or upper GI candida, if they're having mucus, if they're having a lot of phlegm, if they're having thrush or a white tongue, then in these cases, you might want to be a little careful because as the solution, as the formula is passing through, that may feed fungus. I haven't found it to be a big issue for most people, especially if they do something like gargle or mouthwash with some sort of antiseptic. And they may simultaneously see their bloating, their diarrhea, their constipation, whatever it may be down the line improve. So it could be a net benefit. But that would be the one exceptional case if you have or suspect this oral pharyngeal candida, you're having a lot of throat and nasal congestion, mucus, or oral thrush, then you may want to be a little bit careful. But for the most part, because the formula will absorb in the first few feet, we'll be starving overgrowth or imbalances that occur down the line. The third-fold reason why the elemental diets are unique and helpful is they're hypoallergenic, meaning they are designed to be devoid of anything that may trigger inflammation. So they're low antigen. One of the problems that may occur in IBD, in IBS, in FGDs or functional gastrointestinal disorders, which affect roughly or up to 40% of the population, can be these undetermined food intolerances. And so you're eating something, you're not sure quite what it is, but sometimes your bloating is worse, your constipation is worse, your gas or your GERD is worse. And this can be due to one or two foods in your diet that don't sit well with you. And by using the elemental diet, you reduce the amount of irritation from these foods. And at least what I've seen clinically is with a period of this, those foods are better tolerated as your system becomes healthier. And this is a general trend that we see when people improve their gut health. They are more tolerant to food, less intolerant to food. And I also would not recommend food allergy testing. We've spoken about this ad nauseum in different blogs and podcasts. But really, I think listen to your body's response is the best way to go here. And it's also meant to be a complete meal replacement. So the fact that these are pre-digested gives your system some rest, can starve overgrowths of bacteria, and also, at least theoretically, of candida, and help to have a corrective effect on dysbiosis and reduces the antigen load or the inflammatory load. So in total, this is what underlies the results that we're seeing in a study like this. Now, a few of the other points I wanted to connect here. No adverse events occurred. Compliance was similar in both groups, and this is reasonable to conclude or for us to see in that all you're doing is taking a meal replacement shake, so it's not difficult. Some of the formulas taste better than others, so yeah, that could be a factor with compliance. And the caloric intake and body weight stayed the same amongst both groups. And this is important because sometimes people think that using a meal replacement will lead to weight loss. And I think a better way of thinking through this is it should have a corrective effect. Like many therapies in GI, let's say probiotics, they can improve constipation in those who are constipated. They can also reduce diarrhea in those who have diarrhea. So they have more of a corrective effect. And if you're malabsorbing nutrition, then the elemental diet can help you gain weight. And that's been shown in some studies. However, if you're really inflamed, perhaps you're overeating because this chronic GI inflammation is skewing your neurotransmitters and your mood, maybe your sleep, and therefore you're overeating or stress eating, then the elemental diet may have a corrective effect in helping you get back to a more normal weight. As long as you're not under-eating when using the elemental diet, meaning let's say you're eating 2,000 calories per day, and you start doing this half your calories from elemental and half your calories from food, as was done in the treatment group of this study, you want to be careful that you're getting about 1,000 calories from the elemental diet and not inadvertently saying, well, let me make one shake, that's 300 calories, and that will be half of my food for the day. So now you went from 1,000 calories for that half down to 300. So you want to be careful about that. So in recap, at a 1-year follow-up, there was a cutting or a halving of risk of relapse, and there were no adverse events. There was similar compliance, and the body weight stayed the same in both groups. Now, 1 or 2 final points I want to leave you with. With elemental dieting, there's kind of this range of formulas, meaning fully elemental, semi-elemental, and partially elemental. And every once in a while, we'll come across a really savvy and well-educated consumer, and they'll only want to use, let's say, a fully elemental diet. And that's understandable because more research has been done with fully elemental formulas, but I think that's just an artifact of funding for studies from pharmaceutical houses who really started things rolling in hospital care with fully elemental diets. So they were available and they were used in the research. As things here have evolved, we have seen the semi-elemental diets work equally as well as the fully elemental diets. And a few studies have actually found that for those who are underweight, the semi-elemental diets work better than the fully elemental diet. And what delineates these two is really, is the protein source a amino acid powder as compared to typically a partially hydrolyzed whey protein. And sorry if the terminology here is overlapping and confusing, but a partial elemental diet may use something like a whey protein instead of a partially hydrolyzed whey protein. And I have not been able to detect any difference between the two. Whey protein has a number of health benefits. Despite people being scared of whey due to dairy, it's actually very well tolerated. And it's also very rapid absorbing, which is why so many in fitness will use a whey protein supplement after a workout to try to get a fast or rapidly absorbing protein in their system. What the whey protein does over the partially hydrolyzed protein is it reduces the cost and it does improve the flavor profile a bit. So there's a lot of different options on the table. If you're apprehensive, you can start fully elemental and then pivot over to and trial a semi or a partially elemental diet. But the other key point here is to keep in mind that there's a tremendous amount of therapeutic carryover from inflammatory bowel disease in this case, and things like IBS and SIBO. There's the one hallmark study using elemental diets in SIBO and IBS, and there hasn't been much additional, and to my knowledge, any additional research published using elemental diets for SIBO and IBS, but there's a wealth of anecdotal evidence of people benefiting from using elemental diets for GERD, for bloating, for diarrhea, for SIBO, for IBS in general. We're hoping to publish something within the next year or two, whether that be a retrospective chart review or a case series, because in our office, we are using this quite routinely. And one other point to equip you with is, even though the landmark study by Mark Pimentel using Vivonex Plus, which was a great study, used elemental diets for 2 weeks exclusively, it doesn't seem that we need to be so sort of fastidious with our use as this study portrays. Remember, these individuals replaced half their calories in a day for a year with elemental diets. So they may wake up in the morning, be sipping on a shake for breakfast, make one more shake, be sipping on that throughout the lunch hour, and then they have a snack late afternoon and a dinner. And they still saw all this benefit. So the point to take home there is, even though in the one sort of seminal paper, the elemental diets were used for 2 weeks, there's just so much data in IBD showing benefit with this hybrid or half and half approach, and certainly an impressive amount of anecdotal data of individuals deriving benefit from using this in a more loose application. What we will do in the office oftentimes is recommend a 1 to 4 day exclusive or semi-exclusive reset. So to calm things down, aim to use the elemental diet exclusively or as close as you comfortably can. It's sort of relaxed. And then from there, settle into this hybrid approach of consuming about half your calories from the elemental diet and then half from normal food. And again, remember, the rules here are not written in stone. If that's working well for you and you go away for a weekend and you don't want to have to worry about it, fine, not a problem. If you haven't used it for 3 weeks and then let's say you go to a wedding and there's a bunch of celebration and food and alcohol and you come back and your gut's feeling a little bit banged up, could you do this for a 2-day reset and then do the hybrid approach for 1 or 2 weeks until you feel like your gut health has gotten back on better footing? Absolutely. There's a lot of freedom with the application. You may want to check in with your doctor if you're on medications. Oh, and this brings me to the one final point I almost glossed over here. In this study, all of the participants were on mesalazine, a 5-ASA class medication, anti-inflammatory, anti-autoimmune, along with the use of the elemental diet. So do keep your doctor in the loop and make sure to check in with your healthcare provider about making changes. But bear in mind here, there was no contraindication with the use of the 5-ASA class drug mesalazine. And also, we scoured the literature to see if there were any indications that these longer-term hybrid use studies were finding nutrient deficiencies. And we were able to find no data to support that. In fact, I think you could argue somewhat reasonably that if someone has diarrhea and therefore they might be malabsorbing, an intervention that helps with that may lead to a net improvement in their nutrient absorption capacity. So there you have it. Great study from Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics showing that the relaxed or hybrid use of the elemental diet has merit. And there's a number of formulas at your disposal. If you are someone who has Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or IBS or SIBO or GERD or digestive issues that have no diagnostic box they fit within, consider a trial on an elemental diet and make sure to check in with your healthcare provider first. But thankfully, as this study also found, no adverse events were reported and reduced or cut in half the risk of having a relapse. So a simple, safe, natural, and dietary-based solution to help improve your gut health. If you haven't tried it, consider giving the elemental diet a shot.